Okay, better critical thinking, day 8. Be reasonable. A hallmark of the critical thinking is the disposition to change his or her mind when given a good reason to change. Good thinkers want to change their thinking when they discover better thinking. In other words, they can and want to be moved by reason. Yet comparatively few people are reasonable in the full sense of the word. Few are willing to change their minds once set. Few are willing to suspend their beliefs to hear the views with whom they disagree. This is true because the human mind is not naturally reasonable. Reasonability, if it is to develop in the mind to any significant degree, must be actively fostered in the mind by the mind. Although we routinely make inferences or come to conclusions, we don't necessarily do reasonably. Yet we typically see our conclusions as reasonable. We then want to stick to our conclusions without regard for the justification or plausibility. The mind typically decides whether to accept or reject a viewpoint or argument based on whether it already believes it. Henry Sidgwick said, "We think so because other people think so, or because after all we do think so, or because we were told so and think we must think so, or because we once thought so and think we still think so, or because, having thought so, we think we will think so." To put it in another mind, the mind is not naturally malleable. It's not naturally shaped easily. It's not changed. Rather, it is by nature rigid. It's hardened. People often shut out good reasons readily available to them. We often refuse to hear arguments that are perfectly reasonable when those reasons contradict what we already believe. To become more reasonable, open your mind to the possibility at any given moment that you might be wrong and another person might be right. I know that's pretty radical. That's pretty hard for people to do. Be willing to change your mind when the situation or evidence requires it. Recognize that you don't lose anything by admitting you are wrong. Rather, you gain in intellectual development. Be on the lookout for reasonable and unreasonable behavior, yours and others. And it's so easy to focus on unreasonable behavior or thinking. It's much more important to think on your own. Notice when you are unwilling to listen to the reasoned views of others, the reasoned ones when they actually give an argument, not the ones where it's just like a knee-jerk reaction to something, but listen to the reasoned views of others when you're unwilling to modify your views, even when others present evidence or good reasoning that supports a better view. Carefully observe yourself. Can you be moved by reason? Have you ever changed your mind when somebody gave you evidence you hadn't heard before? If you haven't changed your mind, you're not really using any kind of reasoning. Are you open to the voice of reason in others? Not when people are yelling or getting upset or emotional, but when they're thinking about it and they are giving things you may not have heard or things you can check. When you catch yourself being defensive, see whether you can break through your defensiveness, that wall you have, to hear good reasons that are being presented. Identify times when you use language that makes you appear reasonable, even though your behavior proves otherwise. Try to figure out why you or others are being unreasonable. A lot of it has to do with emotions or ways that you have thinking about yourself and what you stand for. That hardens your thinking, but it makes you vulnerable to being pushed around and led into poor reasoning. Do you have a selfish interest in not being open-minded? Do others have a selfish interest in not being open-minded? These are some strategies for becoming more reasonable. Notice how seldom people admit they're wrong. Notice instead how often they hide their mistakes. Most people would rather lie than admit to being wrong. Decide that you do not want to be such a person. Say aloud, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, often wrong. See if you have the courage to admit this during a disagreement. Of course, you may be right. Practice saying in your own mind, I may be wrong. I often am. I'm willing to change my mind when given good reasons. Then look for opportunities to make changes in your thinking. You don't have to change your mind, but give yourself the opportunity to think from another point of view. The most opposite points of view, think about why people might come to that conclusion. When was the last time I changed my mind because someone gave me better reasons for his or her view than I had for mine? To what extent are you open to new ways of looking at things? To what extent can you objectively judge information that refutes what you already think? Can you think about new evidence? Can you really set it aside, disengage your emotions, and consider that information as information if it is against what you already think? Are you able to do that? Realize you are being unreasonable if you are unwilling to listen to someone's reasons. You don't have to agree with it, but to actually be open-minded to listen why they reason the way they do. Or you are irritated by reasons people give you before thinking them through. If you immediately get annoyed, or you become defensive in a discussion. Now, I don't know that we have discussions much anymore. It seems like mostly we have arguments. When you catch yourself being closed-minded, analyze your thinking by completing the following statements in your journal. And by the way, if you read the book, they recommend that these 30 days are accompanied by a journal to reflect on the things that you've been exposed to and think them through. Because when you write things down, it really becomes yours. Analyze your thinking by completing the following statements in your journal. Remember that the more details you write in your journal entries, the better able you will be to change your thinking in future similar situations. A through D. A, I realized I was being close-minded in this situation because B, the thinking I was trying to hold on to is blank. C, thinking that is potentially better, the thinking that is better is blank. D, this thinking is better because blank. Be on the lookout for opportunities to show mercy to others, to display understanding, compassion, and forgiveness. Notice the extent to which others around you favor punishment and suffering as the proper response to deviant behavior that does not fit in, thinking that does not fit in. Notice the extent to which you do, that you want punishment, suffering. Those other guys got to suffer because they don't think right. As you read the newspaper, notice that severe sentences often are given out for crimes that injure no one except the perpetrator. Ask yourself how often punishment is extreme in causing human suffering. Consider 3 strikes and you're out legislation. This is interesting. I notice in this ebook, now this is using reason. In this ebook, they seem to be jumping from reason to punishment. I think there's a problem in the way this thing has been formatted. Yeah. Well, I'll finish it out, but that seems a little strange. I think there may be a formatting error in the book because it doesn't hold together. That's using reasoning, right? So consider how often punishment is extreme. Consider 3 strikes and you're out legislation. The practice of trying children as adults. Consider adult crime, adult time, etc. I think I need to check with the original source and see if that hangs, if that wasn't a formatting error. I'm using you may see this here. So I'm using a Kindle version of that, okay? So we're talking about reason, right? Reasonable behaviors. Strategies for becoming more reasonable. Notice how some people admit they're wrong, etc. And etc. And then it goes beyond the lookout for the thinking is better. And then all of a sudden, look here. They're talking about mercy, compassion, punishment. I am going to go back to the contents. See, that's where we are. Reasonable. Be reasonable. Tomorrow would be ask deep questions. But I'm looking through all these things here, and I will see if there's something about don't dominate, don't be brainwashed, don't be bamboozled by politicians, don't be a blamer, be a citizen of the world, educate yourself, etc. Anyway, to me, that kind of jumped subject matter from being reasonable to talking about punishment and crime. So, again, even in reading this stuff or in listening to me or anyone else, especially the people you think you trust, think for yourself. Think, is this a line of reasoning that follows naturally upon itself? If you all of a sudden jump subject matter, ask why that's being done. Try to, like we learned the other day, when you all of a sudden change horses in midstream, why is that happening? Anyway, the main point, to be reasonable, to use reasoning, to check your own reasoning, especially the harder and more firm you think about that, because people can exploit that. People can exploit you hardening. That's how you see these big believe everything, and then all of a sudden you find out you were wrong in the first place. A good Sunday. Enjoy a quiet day. Enjoy going to church. Enjoy whatever it is you do on a Sunday, day of rest. And we'll talk to you tomorrow.